Hello, my name is Vint Cerf. I'm Google's Vice President and Chief Internet Evangelist, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today on the subject of Internet governance. By this time in 2021, I think we've all recognized that the Internet has a remarkable role to play in the future history of our planet. Plainly, during the pandemic, it has become a very important element of connectivity, permitting people to work remotely where before they had to be working in proximity with each other. It's very important, however, to recognize that not all work can be done remotely and that many jobs require proximity, many of those involving physical interactions with people, whether it's haircuts or other kinds of work. Or possibly work involving manufacturing or maintenance in a data center. All of these and many others require that the parties doing the work be physically present where they can do the work. The consequence of this, of course, is to visit upon the world's population inequities relative to coping with the pandemic. Some people have been able to work remotely from home, for example, and not really see a dramatic difference other than having meetings that are online like this one. On the other hand, there have also been some deficiencies that have been highlighted by the pandemic. On the internet side, perhaps inadequate capacity, maybe not enough equipment, children trying to go to school or parents are trying to work, fighting over access to the internet and its available capacity. Affordability could be an issue to increase capacity so that it could be used by parents and children alike might turn out to be beyond capability of a family to afford. And of course, there is the half of the world's population that doesn't have access to the internet at all, or even where they do have access, it may not be adequate to their need. All of which points to the continuing importance of developing strategies for internet governance. And those include things like incentives for investment in infrastructure, whether it's governments making direct investment or municipal networks that are essentially funded by the citizens of a municipality, or a business investment by a private sector entity, or even some combination of investors to achieve the objective, which is to get internet infrastructure constructed and operated in a sustainable way. An example of this kind of partnership showed up as an opportunity for Google. A few years ago, we were able to build an optical fiber network backbone in the capital city of Uganda, in Kampala, and then make that system's capacity available on a wholesale basis to retailers who competed with each other to provide service to individuals in private sector and government. I think we repeated that operation in the capital city of Ghana, in Accra. And now there's a joint venture called C Squared, which is offering services like this, and I understand maybe considering similar actions in other parts of Africa. Of course, the legislative palette, the policy palette is broad, and there are many issues that need to be resolved. How can we bring the technology to people who need it? How do we deal with the need for electrical power, reliable electrical power, in addition to physical equipment? How do we make all of that affordable? Who will operate the underlying networks? And then even when all of those conditions have been satisfied, we still have a readiness issue associated with the technical ability of people to use the facilities, what we might call digital literacy, an awareness of the risk factors of being online, knowing how to protect important information, usernames, passwords, two-factor authentication, care to avoid clicking on attachments to phishing spam and things of that kind. How do we make sure the population exhibits a readiness level which will allow them to benefit from access to the internet and resist potential hazards of being online. Of course, we still have significant challenges for all of the various companies operating at different layers in the internet architecture to resist the kinds of risks that might arise, for example, of malware or ransomware or denial of service attacks, or for that matter, supply chain attacks, which are quite pernicious, where it's not the primary target that the attacker goes after, but rather someone or some organization that supplies software or hardware to another party who is offering service to customers on the internet. And once they have infected the supply chain, they may be able to introduce a variety of attacks against the system, and thereby harming either businesses or individuals. So our task as we think about internet governance is to figure out what kind of a framework will allow countries and other state and local jurisdictions, companies, private sector entities, and the general public to adopt a defensive posture and also to engage in an offensive posture to deliberately go after parties who are harming others. The complexity of that goal is notable because the internet is essentially global in its scope. It's generally insensitive to crossing international boundaries. And the consequence of that, of course, as you all know, is that parties who are aiming to inflict harm on others may do so across international boundaries, or at least across jurisdictional boundaries. And that leads to a question about cooperation and collaboration in order to identify and track down and apprehend parties who are harming others in this online medium. Figuring out what the right agreements should be on an inter-country basis should be a multi-stakeholder debate. Not only the countries that are involved, but the parties who are affected by the adopted policy should have seats at the table in order to illuminate what the consequences are of choosing various options. And this perhaps is one of the most important things that you, as participants in the North American SIG, can introduce, which is to lay out what the desirable properties should be of adopted policy and how to actually affect that, how to implement it. If it's not implementable, it's not going to be very effective. And so your job, in many respects, is to help analyze, to propose, and then to consider various ways of implementing these policies so as to essentially suppress the harmful potential of this universal global platform while enhancing its utility in the hands of the general public, the private sector, and governments. I wish I could be there with you to have this conversation. Since I can't, I'm relying on you to keep track of the discussion, to document the insights that you will have uncovered, to share those with others so they can have the benefit of your work, and then, of course, to make a commitment to implement those policies which will ultimately benefit all of us. I wish that I could be there with you, but perhaps we'll cross paths on the net.